what is the point of philosophy? Why do we study philosophy? What does the word mean? Well, of course, this raises semantics anytime you're asking what a word means, and what you need to do with a pre-existing word definitely is you look at the natural meanings, the meanings that you can deduce really from the way it's been used in all the written and spoken records that we have. The word philosophy, I think, obviously it has many connotations, and when you're faced with this situation, sometimes different connotations are just unrelated almost, or totally, except by the similar sound of the word. They can just be homonyms, even if the word is spelled exactly the same, but they're actually two separate words. In the case of philosophy, I don't think that's what we have. There's some very significantly different connotations, but I do think they all link together. And just to kind of jump the gun on the conclusion at the beginning, I think what ties them together is that philosophy is always thinking about thinking. It's always where the subject matter of study is thinking. And there's various things follow from that, various of the other connotations. You can see how they're related to that. So for example, I think the most naive, straightforward, a bit superficial view of philosophy is philosophy, as a non-philosopher sees it, philosophy is something philosophers do. Okay, is that circular? Well, no, because you're identifying a group of people that have a hobby. You don't have to say, well, what's the hobby really about? Maybe you're not that interested. You characterize generally groups like that. Scientists is what science does. But if you go inside and you ask the scientist, well, what is science? Or you ask the philosopher, what is philosophy? Well, of course, they're going to have a more particular view about what their hobby is. I mean, it's their activity. They have some idea of what that activity is. So, as superficial as that can be, that's actually an important definition in general for groups. When you think of, say, students or someone that's trying to learn or seek out more knowledge about philosophy, well, they're going to go to the philosophy departments around. The people that do philosophy, as an activity, it goes back before there were philosophy departments. There's still obviously people like me doing philosophy, unpaid amateur philosophy. Some people make their living directly off of doing or teaching philosophy, and other people, are interested in philosophy and apply it, say, in their art or other work. So, that can still be a practical definition. But what is it for the philosophers? Well, I think it's sort of this thinking about thinking. But also there's other definitions within philosophy. This is where the connotations come from. So, for example, there's one meaning of the word philosophy is a philosophy, as a noun, a person's worldview, where philosophy is thinking. Thinking ultimately is about action. It can be very indirect, because you have action and you can think about your actions. As soon as you start thinking about your thinking, there's still actions at the end of that. If you think about your thinking, there's always actions at the end of that. And so philosophers that will accept that see that a philosophy is a worldview. It's the way the patterns and ideas behind your actions. So in that sense, everybody has an implicit philosophy, right? Just a philosophy that's implicit in the actions. Even an animal or a plant, any living thing, anything that has behavior, in fact, has a philosophy. Now, behavior like weather patterns, well, that's questionable, because that, why would you could abstract a philosophy out of that behavior, but you're going to get something, chaotic, amoral, and whatnot when you personify nature like that. But it can be done. Why? Because a philosophy can be abstracted from the behavior, because if you take the behavior as a way of life, which is why it really is for doing with living creatures, then the way they behave shows how they're thinking about that, theoretically. What their thinking is, because there is thinking related to action. And anybody that wants to be a philosopher or take part, or just have a healthy amount of knowledge about this, will also have an explicit philosophy, their own philosophy principles that they live by. It's an interesting side note here to me that it's a deep question in itself, whether this implicit philosophy can or should be the same as your explicit philosophy. Now, I think in general, you should try to make these as similar as possible, so as not to be a hypocrite, right? But I don't think they can be actually the same. I think the implicit philosophy is fundamentally linked to the mundane and earthly in the way you've lived, and will take some of the chaos and consistency and determinacy of the real world into account, whereas your explicit philosophy can and really should be more idealistic. And the reason I say should be is because there is a value to this gap. Your explicit philosophy, what you say you believe in, can be your ideals that you're working for. So when you're trying to make progress in your implicit philosophy, it's important that you have an explicit philosophy that leads, that is futuristic, say, compared to your implicit philosophy. Now, the other connotation I want to talk about is philosophy of. And you can see, since philosophy is thinking about thinking, then when we have a philosophy of something, we're going to be thinking about how we think about that subject. So philosophy of math is thinking about how we think about math. Philosophy of science is thinking about how we think about science, and so on. And when you do that, of course, you're always going to be at the limits of understanding, the limits of human understanding. You're going to rush up as you go through the thinking, through the easy things, and you're going to get to the hard ones where the anomalies are and the paradox. So, fact is, in philosophy, of course, you don't just go up to this limit of understanding. You eagerly go beyond that limit. And this is one of the great things about humans, or maybe other animals have this, but it could be part of the human experience or the mammal experience, or who knows. But it's an important part of our cognition and ability to make progress and learn, that we can conceive of impossibilities. Okay, because that's what you need to do. To conceive of possibilities, you have to be able to conceive of things that are impossible, right? Or else you're not conceiving of possibilities, you'd be conceiving of actualities directly. So the ability to conceive of an impossibility, either a practical one that, again, bears a discussion of its own, like nothing, where we've never had an example of nothing. Nothing is the product of a limit, like the idea of infinity, according to me. And yeah, that's very useful. And then there's all kinds of impossibilities, like fairies or whatever. No offense to the fairy believers, but just to grab an example of an actual impossibility. But that's the thing. If you can think of 1,000,000 possibilities and 999,999 of them turn out to be impossibilities, if that one remaining one was turned from a possibility into an actuality, that's worth it. Just like animals that create thousands or millions of offspring just so a few can survive, or in mammals, just you create millions of sperm, millions of eggs that will never be released, and that's all worth it by biological logic. So by biologic, that's all worth it. To make it. If you have 1 in 1,000,000 odds in biology, that doesn't mean you don't play the game. In human realms, we don't really like to play odds like that theoretically, though people play the lotto. So, but you just play 1,000,000 times. If you have to roll 1,000,000 times to win, and you can roll 1,000,000 times, roll 1,000,000 times to win. And if what you win is worth more than the cost of rolling 1,000,000 times, which it obviously is in these cases, then that's all good. So with philosophy, it can seem a lot like bullshit to people because it does work beyond understanding. But this is how we discover the new understandings and how they work their way back in to our culture and our natural language and leave this bubble of those that are doing philosophy actively as an intellectual, named intellectual activity, and out into the philosophies in the wild that people actually have implicit in their behavior based on their way of thinking. All right. Cheers.